They called me a witch, the devil incarnate, a curse that brought disaster upon a small, pious town. My red hair was not a gift from nature, but a mark from hell. My green eyes were not the windows to my soul, but an abyss holding dark sorcery. But that is the story they tell. The truth, much like a deep wound, is often concealed by ugly rumors. Behind the derogatory name, Fiery Abby, was I, an orphan girl who had to learn to swallow her tears since she was 8 years old. Behind the accusations of witchcraft was a brilliant intellect and a fierce desire to heal, inherited from my venerable grandmother. This is not just my story of survival. This is a scathing indictment of how fear and ignorance can turn a savior into a demon in the eyes of the world. It shows that the line between a saint and a martyr is sometimes as thin as a venomous whisper. Today, at the age of 82, I have decided to break a silence that has lasted for more than half a century. A story I have never told anyone, a secret that even my own children only learned when they were adults. Prepare to listen, because the truth I am about to reveal is more terrifying than any supernatural legend. It's terrifying because it is completely true. I believe this story will touch your heart, no matter who you are or where you come from. As you listen, please leave a comment below to let me know which city, which country you are listening from, so we can all feel the power of connection through these inspiring stories. My name is Abigail, but back then, everyone knew me as Red Abby or Fiery Abby, and it wasn't out of affection, my dear. It was pure fear. Fear of a girl who was born different in a small town in the middle of Illinois, where being different was considered the devil's work. I was born in '43, during the war overseas. But here in the United States, life went on much the same as always. Slow, suspicious, and full of superstition. My hair was red, like a burning ember. It wasn't just any red. It was an intense red that made people stop on the street to stare. My eyes were green as a clear river, and my pale skin was dotted with freckles. It sounds pretty when you think about it like that, right? But in that time and in that place, I was a freak of nature. You see, my dear, people fear what they don't understand. To them, my hair wasn't just hair. It was a sign that I didn't belong, something foreign and suspect. The little town where I grew up was in the countryside, one of those places you get to by bus after hours on a dirt road. Wood frame houses, unpaved streets, a town square with a church in the middle, and a general store that sold everything: medicine, kerosene, sugar, fabric. The battery-powered radio was a novelty, and electricity was a promise that never seemed to arrive. At night, everyone used a kerosene lamp or a tallow candle. It was in this place that I lost my parents when I was 8 years old. They were coming back from Springfield on a Greyhound bus, one of those old buses that swayed like a ship on a rough sea. The road was dangerous, full of sharp curves and steep cliffs. On one of those curves, near Eagle's Peak, the driver lost control of the wheel. The bus plunged down the cliff. 17 souls were extinguished that day. My father and my mother, who was 6 months pregnant with the brother I would never know. My mother. She was a redhead too, a softer flame than mine. It was her legacy to me, this fiery crown. She tried to hide it, tucking her hair under scarves, lowering her eyes as if apologizing for her own light. But the whispers followed her anyway. After the accident, those whispers found me. I didn't just lose my parents, I inherited their curse. At 8 years old, I learned the cruelest lesson. Grief is a private island, but suspicion is a public spectacle. The town didn't just see an orphan. They saw the strange fruit of a strange tree, and they watched me with a mixture of pity and fear, waiting to see if I, too, was somehow cursed. Losing one's parents is a profound pain, yet now, the weight of an entire town's prejudice falls upon the fragile shoulders of an 8-year-old girl. Will her grandparents' love be enough to shelter this fiery hair from their cruel glares? Let's listen on and find out. They said my father had been bewitched, that she had cast a spell to trap him. Nonsense, right? My father was a hard-working man who fell in love with the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. It was as simple as that. After the accident, I went to live with my maternal grandparents. Their house was in front of the town square. It was a good house for the time. 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and a huge backyard full of fruit trees and a vegetable garden. They had electricity there. The smell I remember most is of wet earth after the rain, mixed with the smoke from the wood burning in the stove. At night, when the wind blew, the whole house would creak, and I would listen to the sound of dry leaves rustling in the yard. Grandma Beatrice was a small woman, but as strong as an oak root. She knew every herb that existed, how to make tea for any illness, and a prayer for any affliction. She was the region's midwife, the folk healer everyone sought out when the doctor couldn't help, and a real doctor was only in the city, 2 hours away by bus. So, Grandma Beatrice took care of everyone, children with worms, women in labor, men with back pain, young girls with stomach trouble. Grandpa Walter was the town blacksmith, a big man with thick arms from hammering hot iron, his calloused hands like tanned leather. He fixed hoes, made horseshoes, and gates for the nicer houses. The sound of his hammer hitting the anvil echoed throughout the town early in the morning. It was a sound that calmed me, made me feel safe. It meant Grandpa was there, working, taking care of us. But even with all the love from my grandparents, I already felt that I was different. The other children didn't really play with me. Mothers would pull their children away when I passed by. At church, people would move away a little when I got close. It was never anything blatant, but a child senses these things. I knew there was something wrong with me. I just didn't understand what. Grandma always told me, "Abigail, God made you special for a reason. One day you'll understand." And she would say this while stroking my hair with so much affection that I almost believed her. Almost. Life at my grandparents' house had its own rhythm, marked by the tolling of the church bell and the crowing of the neighbor's rooster, Mr. Anthony's. Grandma Beatrice would get up before the sun to make coffee in the kettle, strained through a flannel cloth, its aroma mixing with the smell of cornbread baking in the clay oven, which woke me up every single day. Grandpa Walter was already at the forge early, helping whoever needed wrought iron. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. He had a deep voice that came from the bottom of his chest, and when he called my name from the yard, I would come running, even if I was on the other side of town. My grandparents' house was respected because of their professions. Grandpa was the only blacksmith for miles around, and Grandma was sought after even by people from neighboring towns for difficult illnesses or complicated births. This gave us a protection that I only understood later. People might find my fiery hair strange, but they needed my grandparents too much to cause any open trouble. Still, I felt the weight of their stares. When Grandma took me to Mr. Grayson's grocery store to buy sugar or kerosene, the women would whisper, "Just look at that girl's hair, just like her mother's. So strange." God forbid. They thought I couldn't hear, but a child has a keen ear for malice. Mrs. Karen, the most influential woman in town, was the one who talked the most. She was married to the owner of the drugstore, had 3 blonde daughters who always wore starched dresses, and she led the ladies' group at the church. When she saw me, she would make a point of secretly making the sign of the cross, as if I were a plague she could catch. At school, which was just one room with a long bench and a blackboard, I always sat in the corner. The teacher, Mrs. Davis, tried to be fair, but the other children avoided me. During recess, I played alone under the big tree, making dolls out of corn cobs that Grandma gave me. It was Grandma who taught me my first letters, long before school. She knew how to read because she had learned from her employer when she worked for a family in Springfield before she got married. "A woman who can read has power," she always said, "but you can't show it off too much or it becomes a problem." So I read in secret. Mostly the old almanacs that arrived at the drugstore and the scraps of newspaper that were used to wrap goods. Grandma would take me with her when she went to perform blessings or deliver babies. I would stay by her side, quietly, learning the prayers, watching how she handled the herbs, observing the way she talked to people who were suffering. She had the hands of an angel. She knew exactly where to touch to take away the pain, which herb to use for each ailment. "Pay attention, Abigail," she would say. "One day, all of this will be yours. God doesn't give a gift to someone who won't know how to use it." And she would show me how to pick each leaf, how to dry it, how to prepare it. anise for a baby's colic, boldo for a stomachache, rue to ward off the evil eye, and sage for spiritual cleansing. Grandma's backyard was a veritable laboratory. It had organized beds with every type of medicinal plant you can imagine. Early in the morning, she would water them all with well water, talking to the plants as if they were people. Grow beautiful, my child. Grow strong to heal those in need. I thought it was just an old woman's quirk, but I later understood that plants have souls too. They also respond to affection. The afternoons were spent in the large kitchen, with Grandma teaching me how to cook beans on the wood-burning stove, how to make cornbread, and how to prepare apple pie. The fire had to be kept going all the time because matches were not readily available. We would keep embers in the ashes so as not to lose the fire, and at night, we would cover everything to keep it warm for the morning. Grandpa would come home as the sun was setting, sweaty and dirty with soot, smelling of hot iron stuck to his clothes. He would wash his hands in the basin in the yard with ash soap that Grandma made, change his shirt, and sit at the table for dinner. The food was simple but plentiful. Rice, beans, vegetables from the garden, meat, and always the cornmeal that accompanied everything. At night, after dinner, Grandpa would smoke his hand-rolled cigarette sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, and Grandma would be there beside him, knitting or mending clothes. I would sit on the floor, leaning against her leg, listening to the stories she told, stories of ghosts, of the headless horseman, of local legends, but also family stories of our ancestors, of what life was like before I was born. It was a simple life, but there was love. Grandma and Grandpa raised me, as if I were their own daughter. I never lacked anything they could give. Food on the table, clean clothes, the right amount of affection, and, most importantly, respect. They treated me like a person, not a freak who needed to hide. But I knew that outside, beyond the walls of our yard, the world saw me differently, and as I grew up and became a young woman, that difference would become more dangerous. When I turned 15, my body changed in a way that drew even more attention. It wasn't just the red hair that made people stop and stare. I had grown, gained curves where before there was only bone and skin, and my beauty, which had been frightening for its strangeness in a child, was now frightening for its power in a young woman. Grandma made sure to explain everything to me about becoming a woman before I even needed to know. She knew I couldn't count on other women to teach me these things. When your moon time comes, she would say, you will keep it a secret. You will take care of yourself without making a fuss. A different woman like you can't give people a reason to talk. But Grandma didn't stop at just menstruation. She explained everything to me, without beating around the bush or being ashamed. Since I had accompanied her to birth since I was little, I already knew where babies came from. I had seen women give birth. I had heard the screams and groans of labor. Abigail, she said one afternoon, while we were drying herbs in the yard, you need to know how a woman's body works, how a child is made, how to prevent it when it's not time, and how to take care of it when it comes. She told me that a woman needed to be with a man to have a child. It doesn't have to be a marriage on paper, my child. The body doesn't ask if there's a ring on the finger, but it's important to choose a good man who will take responsibility if a child comes. Grandma was practical about these things, with no silly romanticism. Marriage is good because it gives protection to the woman and the children, but what makes a baby is the meeting of a man and a woman. This can happen with love or without love, with a blessing or without a blessing. And when my first period came, Grandma had everything ready. Clean cloths, raspberry leaf tea to ease the cramps, and, most importantly, a lecture on how to behave from then on. Now you are a woman, Abigail. You must walk with your head held high, but without being provocative. You must respect yourself to be respected. And remember what I taught you. Your body is yours, and you decide when and with whom to share it. But also remember that every choice has a consequence. The problem was that I couldn't go unnoticed, even when I wanted to. My hair was like fire even when I tried to hide it with a scarf. My green eyes drew attention from any distance, and my white skin with freckles was so different from the other dark-haired girls in town that it seemed like I had come from another world. Mrs. Karen intensified her persecution. Now she wasn't content with just whispering. She spoke openly. "A girl like that isn't normal. Just look at the color of that hair. God doesn't make someone like that without a reason." And the reason, in her mind and in the minds of the other pious women, could only be something bad. It was around this time that I started working at Mr. Raymond's drugstore, Mrs. Karen's husband. He needed someone to organize the medicines, clean the glass bottles, and help simple customers when he wasn't there. Grandpa got me the job, more to keep me busy than for the need for money. The drugstore was on the main street, right in front of the church square. It was an important establishment in the town. It sold medicine, perfume, soap, and hygiene products that came from Springfield. It had 2 large, dark wood shelves full of glass jars with medicine, a scale for weighing bulk products, and a long counter where Mr. Raymond prepared the more complicated prescriptions. I liked the work. I learned the difference between the medicines, what each one was for, how to make change, and how to treat customers politely. Mr. Raymond was a fair man. He treated everyone the same, rich or poor. He taught me a lot about medications and let me read the medical books he kept in the back of the store. The smell of the drugstore was a mixture of alcohol, iodine, soap, and a sweet perfume that came from the imported cosmetics. They were different smells from my house, cleaner, more modern. There I felt useful, important, as if I had a place in the world besides being the strange girl, Beatrice's granddaughter. But Mrs. Karen didn't like seeing me working there at all. She thought I would contaminate the products with my strangeness. She was always inventing excuses to get her husband to fire me. "Raymond, that girl will scare away the customers. People are uncomfortable with her here. It's not right for a creature like that to be handling people's medicine." Mr. Raymond resisted as best he could. He knew I was a good employee, honest, dedicated. But the pressure from his wife and the other ladies in town was mounting. They invented stories that I read too much, that I knew things a girl shouldn't know, that I asked too many questions about the medicines. And it was true that I read a lot. Every book that came into my hands, I devoured. Almanacs, old newspapers, medicine leaflets, prescriptions, anything written interested me. Grandma always encouraged it, but she warned me not to show off this skill too much. "A woman who knows too much scares men and bothers other women," she would say. It was by reading Mr. Raymond's medical books that I began to better understand what Grandma did. The plants she used had scientific names. Her blessings followed a logic that was written in those old books. She wasn't superstitious, she was wise. She knew things that the doctors in Springfield also knew. She had just learned them in a different way. I started to mix the knowledge from the books with what Grandma taught me. When she prepared a boldo tea for a stomachache, I already knew that the plant had substances that really helped with digestion. When she blessed a frightened child, I understood that those gestures and words had a calming effect, that they relaxed the child and the mother together. People started to notice that I knew more than I should. When someone came to the drugstore with a prescription, I already knew what illness it was for, what effect it would have, and how long they had to take it. This scared people. How could a 15-year-old girl know so much about medicine? Mrs. Karen spread the rumor that I had a pact with the devil, that I had learned these things from an evil entity. "Normal girls aren't born knowing these things," she would repeat. She could only have been taught by someone she shouldn't have been. The situation became tense when a woman from a neighboring town brought her sick son to see me. The boy had a sore on his leg that just wouldn't heal. She had taken him to doctors, to healers, to all sorts of folk practitioners, and nothing worked. Someone told her to look for the red-haired girl who understood medicine. I looked at the wound and saw that it was bad. Yellow pus was oozing out, and the skin around it was all red and hot. It smelled bad, that sweet, rotten smell of decaying flesh that I already knew from other cases. The wound had no scab, it just stayed open, oozing filth. And the boy had a fever and a swollen leg. From the appearance and the smell, I knew it was a severe infection, the kind that eats the flesh from the inside if not treated properly. Grandma always said that a wound like that needed a strong cleaning and medicine that would kill the infection inside and out. I made a solution with boiled water, coarse salt, and a few drops of iodine I got from the drugstore to wash the wound well. Then I applied an ointment that Grandma made with copaiba leaves, barbatimao, and a little bit of honey to help it heal. For the inside, I gave the boy a strong tea of sucupira and boldo to cleanse his blood, along with a sulfa tablet that Mr. Raymond gave me, saying it was good for serious infections. I instructed the mother to wash the wound 3 times a day with the solution, always change the dressing, and give him the tea and the tablet exactly as prescribed. In a week, the wound had stopped oozing, the redness had disappeared, and it was beginning to close, with new skin growing from the edges inward. The news spread. Other people started seeking me out. I saw them secretly, after hours at the drugstore, at my grandparents' house. Grandma helped me, but I was already going beyond what she knew. I was combining modern medicine with traditional medicine in a way that no one else around there did. And the more I healed, the more dangerous I became. Because in a small, superstitious town, a young woman who heals too much can only be meddling with things she shouldn't. Grandma started to worry about the number of people seeking me out. "Abigail, you're drawing too much attention," she warned me. When a healer becomes too famous, she becomes a target. People start to get jealous, to invent malicious stories. She had reason to worry. I was already hearing heavier whispers on the street, more suspicious glances when I passed by. "Maybe it's better if you stop for a while," Grandma suggested one afternoon in May. "Let the dust settle. Let people forget a little." But how could I stop helping those who were suffering? It was stronger than me. It was as if it were my duty in the world. Grandma would sigh, shake her head, but she didn't insist. She understood that I had inherited her knowledge and her gift. "Then at least be more discreet," she pleaded. "See fewer people. Choose your cases more carefully. Don't expose yourself so much." But the time for being discreet was over. The gossip was already planted. The suspicions had already taken root. Mr. Raymond called me in one day and said, with a pained look on his face, "Abigail, you're a good girl. You work hard, but I can't keep you here anymore. Karen is driving me crazy at home, saying that as long as you work here, she won't set foot in the drugstore again. And you know how she is. When she says something, she means it." He seemed ashamed to have to fire me. Yesterday she gave me an ultimatum. "It's either you or her. I need peace in my home, girl. You understand, don't you?" Of course I understood. Mrs. Karen was his wife, the mother of his daughters, the lady of the house. I went home devastated, feeling like I was losing another layer of protection. The drugstore was my refuge, the place where I felt useful and normal. But I soon forgot the sadness of the lost job because a few weeks later, something happened that shattered me from the inside out, something for which I would never be prepared. It was a morning in June of '59, one of those with a pleasant chill that called for hot coffee and conversation in the kitchen. I woke up to a strange silence. Grandma always got up before me. She would already be busy at the stove when I came out of my room. But that day, nothing. No sound of pots, no smell of fresh coffee. I called for her. "Grandma?" Silence. A silence that chilled the blood in my veins. I ran to her room and found Grandma Beatrice lying in bed. But when I touched her hand, it was cold as a river stone in winter. "Grandma!" I screamed, shaking her, trying to wake her up, knowing it was useless. "Don't leave me alone now." "Not now." I broke down in tears, holding the hand that had taught me so much, that had protected me since I was a child, that would no longer stroke my hair with affection. Grandpa Walter arrived shortly after, coming from the forge when he heard me screaming. He found us both there, me holding Grandma's cold hand, crying like a lost child. He stood in the doorway, his eyes welling up, with an expression of guilt that broke my heart. "Abigail?" he said, his voice trembling. I slept beside her all night and didn't notice a thing. I got up early this morning, as always, went to the forge, and she was already like this. He wiped his face with his hand, trying to hide his tears. How did I not feel it? How did I not realize my Beatrice was saying goodbye? "It's not your fault, Grandpa." I tried to console him, even with my heart in pieces. Grandma passed peacefully in her sleep, but Grandpa just shook his head, inconsolable. We both stood there, crying together over the loss of the woman who was the center of our lives. And I knew that now, without Grandma, our family was much more fragile against the storms that were to come. At that moment, my dear, I didn't just lose a grandmother. I lost my shield. All of her knowledge, her burdens, were now placed entirely on the frail shoulders of an orphan girl. Her shield is gone, and now Abigail must face the world alone. Will the knowledge her grandmother left behind be a gift, or will it become a curse that draws her into even greater danger? Let's continue and see how she wields this inheritance. The funeral was on a Thursday, with a light rain that slowly dampened everything, as if the sky itself were crying. The whole town went to the cemetery. The same people who looked at me sideways were there, paying their respects to the woman who raised me. Grandma had helped everyone at some point, delivered almost every woman under 40, cured sick children, eased the pain of the elderly, blessed the frightened. But I knew that when the dirt covered her coffin, my protection would be buried along with it. From that moment on, it was just me and Grandpa in the world. Father Michael, who had arrived 2 years earlier to replace the previous priest, gave a beautiful speech about how Grandma had been a servant of God, how she had used the gifts she received to help her neighbors. He was young, a graduate of a seminary in Springfield, full of modern ideas about how to combat the superstitions of the countryside. After the funeral, people started to seek me out. It was natural. I had been Grandma's apprentice for years. I knew how to make the same teas, knew the same prayers, had her hands for healing. But for me, it was different. I wasn't just repeating what I had learned. I was mixing it all with the books I read, creating new treatments. The first person I healed on my own was Mrs. Josephine, an elderly woman who suffered from rheumatism in her hands. Grandma had always treated her with sukupira tea and massages with copaiba oil. I kept the basic treatment, but added exercises I had read about in a physical therapy book and changed her diet, cutting out foods that cause inflammation. In 2 weeks, Mrs. Josephine was moving her fingers without pain for the first time in years. She told everyone that the red-haired girl had achieved what doctors in Springfield couldn't, and so my fame began. For better and for worse, people came from far away to see me. Cases that doctors had given up on, illnesses that no one could identify, problems that traditional medicine couldn't solve. I saw everyone at my grandparents' house, in the yard where Grandma had her medicinal plant beds. Grandpa Walter grew worried. He saw that I was dealing with things more complicated than Grandma had ever handled. "Abigail, you're getting yourself into trouble," he warned me. Fame for a healer is a double-edged sword. It draws both the needy and the envious, especially for someone like you, who was born drawing attention. But I couldn't stop. It was as if a force inside me compelled me to help those who were suffering. When I saw a sick person, I knew exactly what to do, what medicine to use, what prayer to say. It was pure instinct, as if I had been born for it. The trouble started when I cured the daughter of Mr. Harrison. The girl, who was about 10 years old, had a fever that wouldn't break. She had been like that for a week, delirious, unable to eat or drink water. Mr. Harrison had called a doctor from Springfield, but the man said there was nothing more he could do, that they should just wait for God's will. When they called me, I saw that the girl had a serious infection, probably in her blood. She needed a strong antibiotic, but also treatment to lower the fever and cleanse her system. I made a solution with water, sugar, and salt to hydrate her, a tea of willow bark for the pain and fever, and got a medication from the drugstore that I knew would fight the infection. The girl improved on the first day. By the third day, she was playing in the yard. Mr. Harrison was so grateful that he offered me money, land, anything I wanted. I only asked him to spread the word that it was God who had cured his daughter through his own hands, not through mine. But it was useless. The news spread anyway. The red-haired girl had saved the daughter of the most powerful man in the region from certain death. If she could do that, what else couldn't she do? Did she really have a pact with supernatural forces? Father Michael started watching me. He would show up at my house unannounced, asking what kind of prayers I used, which saints I invoked, if I followed the precepts of the Catholic Church. At first, he even tried to bring me closer. He offered to teach me the right prayers, the appropriate saints for each type of cure. When he realized I wouldn't submit to his control, he changed his strategy. He began to preach in his sermons about the dangers of false healers, about how the devil used innocent people to deceive the faithful. He never said my name directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Mrs. Karen became my declared enemy. She spread rumors that I used forbidden arts, that my cures were temporary because they came from an impure source, that anyone who was treated by me was putting their soul at risk. She organized a group of ladies to watch me, to note who sought me out, what kind of treatments I performed. The tension in the town increased when I cured a young woman who was having trouble getting pregnant. She and her husband had been trying to have a child for 5 years, had already spent a fortune on doctors and promises. The woman, whose name was Felicity, came to me in tears, saying she didn't know what else to do. Talking to her, I discovered that her menstrual cycle was a mess. Sometimes she would go 3 months without it, other times it would come twice in the same month. When it came, it was either very light and dark, or it was too heavy and wouldn't stop. Grandma always said that a woman with an irregular cycle had difficulty conceiving because her body didn't know when it was ready to receive the seed. Mrs. Felicity? I explained. Your body is not in the right rhythm. It's like a plant that doesn't know when to flower. Grandma had taught me that a woman's cycle worked like the phases of the moon, and when it was messed up, it needed specific plants to set everything right. First, she needed to strengthen her blood, because weak blood cannot sustain a child. For this, I prepared a tea with dong quai, a root that Grandma called the women's ginseng. This plant works on our blood, strengthens circulation, and helps the female humors to balance themselves. It's like fertilizer for the garden of your womb, I explained. Then, to regulate her cycle, I used Vitex, a seed that acts directly on the part of a woman's brain that controls when menstruation occurs. Grandma used to say that this plant talks to the body's mind, sending signals for the humors to organize themselves properly, especially those that make a woman ovulate at the right time. And to prepare the womb itself, I gave her wild yam, which Grandma called a soft bed for the baby. This root has a substance that makes the uterus strong and ready to receive and hold a child. It's like a special pillow where the baby will nestle. I advised her on the right days to be with her husband. Pay attention to your body. When you feel a slight pain in your belly in the middle of the month and a clear discharge like egg white comes out, it's time to be intimate. At that moment, your body is sending the signal that it's ready to create life. 6 months later, she was pregnant, the first of 3 children she had after that. But instead of gratitude, this generated more suspicion. How could an unmarried 16-year-old girl know about the intimate matters of a married woman? What kind of knowledge was this that she possessed? The gossip became heavier. They said I did works to tie men down, that I knew how to break up marriages, that I caused abortions in women who didn't want children. All lies, but lies repeated often enough become the truth in the mouths of the people. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but fate hadn't finished punishing me yet. It was on a cold, sunless afternoon that November. I was at home mending clothes when I realized the sound of the hammer had stopped too early. Grandpa was a man of rigid routine. He worked until the sun went down, never stopping before his time. That sudden silence gave me a bad feeling that chilled my blood. "Grandpa!" I yelled from the house. Nothing. "Grandpa, is everything all right?" Total silence. I ran to the forge, and what I saw completely destroyed me. Grandpa was lying on the dirt floor, half of his face burned by the red-hot iron. The horrible smell of burnt flesh mixed with charcoal and hot metal made me so nauseous I almost fainted. From what I could gather, he had a sudden attack. A stroke, maybe. I can't say. It happened while he was hammering a horseshoe. He fell forward, his face landing directly on the lit forge. The left side of his face had melted from the heat. His eye was closed forever, and his hair had burned to the root. It was a nightmarish vision that haunts me to this day. "No!" I screamed, falling to my knees beside him. "Don't leave me alone!" Not now. But my dear grandfather, who had always been so handsome, so strong, was there, disfigured, unrecognizable, dead in the worst way imaginable. In that moment, I understood that God had decided to take everything from me. When loss follows loss, it's easy to feel as if the entire world has turned against you. Having lost her last protector, Abigail is now utterly alone. But perhaps, in the deepest despair, another kind of light is about to appear. Let's find out if that light is love. First my parents, then Grandma, now Grandpa, and in such a cruel way that it seemed like a punishment for my sins. I stayed there, hugging that burned body, crying until I had no tears left. With his death, I lost my last protection. Now I was an orphan girl, completely alone in the world, with no one to defend me from the fury that was growing in the town. Months later, I got to know James properly. He had always lived in town, but he was 3 years older than me and was always busy with work at his father's general store. He was tall, dark-haired, with large hands from carrying sacks of corn and sugar all day. He had a slightly crooked smile that appeared when he found something funny and dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The first time we really talked was on a Sunday afternoon after church. I was walking home when he approached me in the square near the gazebo, where the band played during festivals. "Abigail," he said, taking off his hat, "may I walk you home?" It was like a lightning bolt on a sunny day. It had been so long since anyone had treated me like a normal woman, since someone had shown interest in me beyond my ability to cure illnesses. I said yes, but my heart was racing so fast I thought he could hear it from a distance. We walked slowly down the dirt road, talking about simple things. He asked if I was managing to take care of the house by myself, if I needed anything, if I wasn't afraid to live without family nearby. He spoke with that deep, calm voice of a man who thinks before he speaks. "Everyone says you're different," he said when we reached the gate of my house. "But I think you're just smarter than the rest of us here." That touched me more than any beautiful compliment I could have received. We started meeting in secret. He would stop by my house in the late afternoon, when he finished work at the store. We would sit on the porch, drinking the coffee I made, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about the goods that arrived from Springfield, the news that travelers brought, the plans he had to improve the family business. I talked about the books I read, the plants I grew, the patients I saw. He listened with genuine interest, asked intelligent questions, and never showed fear or suspicion of my work. To him, I was just an interesting girl with special gifts, not a dangerous freak. The first kiss happened on a rainy afternoon when he had to come inside to avoid getting wet. We were sitting in the living room, closer than usual, and when our eyes met, it happened naturally. He held my face with his calloused hands and kissed me slowly, carefully, as if I were a precious thing that could break. The kiss awakened a thirst in me that I didn't know existed. My whole body grew warm, my heart pounded, and a wild desire to give in completely took hold of me. But in the midst of that fire, Grandma's voice echoed in my head. "Abigail, your body is yours, but every choice has a consequence. A man and a woman together make a baby, and a baby without marriage is a disaster for the mother." I knew very well how it worked. I had seen unmarried pregnant women kicked out of their homes by their families, having to raise a child alone, being pointed at on the street as a lost woman. I knew that for a girl like me, who was already viewed with suspicion, a pregnancy out of wedlock would be my complete ruin. So, even with all the desire burning in my veins, I always stopped when the kisses got too heated. "I can't, James," I would say when I felt he also wanted to go further. "Not like this. Not before we're married." And he respected that, even though I could see the same desire in his eyes that I felt. Our courtship was discreet because it had to be. His family was well regarded in town. Respected merchants who couldn't afford to have their son involved with the strange girl. His mother, Mrs. Catherine, was a close friend of Mrs. Karen and the other pious women who persecuted me. Even so, it was the happiest time of my life until then. For the first time, I felt like a real woman, desired, loved by someone who saw me as I was, without wanting to change me. James was a good kisser. He held me with affection and whispered sweet words in my ear that made me forget all the cruel things I heard on the street. We made plans. He was going to talk to his father, ask for my hand in marriage, and face any opposition from his family. I would leave the life of a healer behind. I would be an ordinary wife, a mother, a respectable homemaker. I was willing to trade everything for a normal life by his side. But the dream was short-lived. The pressure on his family increased when someone saw us kissing behind the church one festival night. Mrs. Karen went straight to Mrs. Catherine, saying her son was being bewitched by a witch, that I had cast some kind of spell on him. "That girl is not a Christian," she repeated. "Just look at the color of that hair. Those eyes. It's not of God. Your James is being used by the devil through her." And Mrs. Catherine, who had always been a weak woman, allowed herself to be influenced by her friends. The first conversation James had with his parents was a disaster. His father, Mr. Johnson, a pragmatic man used to doing business, got straight to the point. "My son, you can have any girl in this town or any other. Why her? Why the one who will bring trouble to our family?" James tried to argue, said I was a good, hard-working girl who knew how to take care of a home and sick people, but his parents wouldn't listen to reason. They were afraid of the gossip, of the discrimination the whole family would suffer if he married me. The pressure mounted when Father Michael got involved. He called James for a private conversation and said it was his Christian duty to distance himself from a person who posed a spiritual danger to the community. He said our relationship was a trap from the devil to corrupt a young man from a Christian family. James endured the pressure for a few months. We continued to meet in secret, but I could see he was suffering. His entire family had turned against him. His friends drifted away. Even the family business began to suffer, as some people stopped buying from their store. Around that time, I stopped going to church altogether. One night, he came to my house looking like he hadn't slept. He sat on the porch and was silent for a long time, just looking at the plants in the yard. When he finally spoke, the words came out slowly, as if each one hurt his throat. "Abigail, I can't do this anymore," he said. "My family is forcing me to choose between you and them. If I stay with you, I'll lose everything, my family, my job, my future." I didn't blame him then, my dear. I only felt pity. Sometimes, love isn't strong enough to fight the fear of facing the whole world alone. He chose the easier path, and I understood, even as my heart was breaking. He held my hand and continued, "I love you, but I'm not strong enough to face the whole world." I understood, but understanding is a cold comfort when your heart is being ripped from your chest. It was one thing to be feared by strangers, but to be abandoned by the one person who saw the real me? That was a wound deeper than any other. I nodded, a mechanical gesture, and told him to go in peace, because what else could I say? My pride wouldn't let me beg. He cried, yes, fat tears of self-pity that did nothing to soothe my own silent agony. He spoke of deserving better, but his words were hollow echoes in the space he was creating between us. After he left, I sat on that porch until the sun rose, not crying, but breaking. The pain wasn't a fire, it was ice, freezing me from the inside out. He hadn't just left me, he had validated every cruel whisper, every fearful glance. He had agreed with them. I was not worth the trouble. You know, that pain wasn't a burning fire, it was ice. It froze my heart, not to die, but to survive. It was the only way I could keep walking after the one person who saw the real me turned his back. Sometimes, to survive, one must let their own heart turn to ice. The pain of being abandoned by the one person who truly saw her has changed Abigail, but ironically, the town's cruelty is far from over. Even in this depth of sorrow, her greatest trial is yet to come. The following week, I learned that his family had already arranged his engagement to one of Mrs. Karen's daughters. Of course, it had to be one of her girls. The second daughter, whose name was Caroline, just like James's mother, Catherine. Blonde with blue eyes, educated by nuns, who played the piano at church, and whose cross-stitch was a thing of beauty. A proper girl, from a well-known family, who didn't bother anyone. And what's more, it sealed the alliance between two of the most respectable families in town. Mrs. Karen must have been radiant. Besides saving Mrs. Catherine's son from the witch's clutches, she also managed to marry off a daughter to a good merchant family. The irony was too cruel. The man I loved was going to marry the daughter of the woman who persecuted me the most, who spoke the most ill of me, who worked the hardest to drive me out of town. It was as if fate had a perverse sense of humor. They married 6 months later, in a big party at Mrs. Karen's house, with the whole town present. I stayed home that day, listening from afar to the music and the fireworks, knowing that my former love was dancing with the daughter of my greatest enemy. I continued to see my patients, tend to my garden, and live my life. But a part of me had died along with that love. The hope of being normal, of having a common life, of being accepted by someone without having to hide who I was. The strange thing is that even with all the discrimination, people continued to seek me out. It was such hypocrisy. By day, they avoided me on the street, made the sign of the cross when I passed. They whispered about my strangeness. But when things got tough, when the doctor couldn't help, when a child was dying or a woman couldn't give birth, then they would show up at my door. They came at dawn, in secret, ashamed to be there. "Abigail, can you take a look at my boy? He's had a fever for 3 days and isn't getting any better." Or, "My friend said you understand women's problems. Can you help me?" They needed me, but they were ashamed to admit it publicly. I didn't go after anyone. People came to me when the situation was dire and they didn't care what the gossips would say. Money in hand and sickness at home make any prejudice disappear in an instant. Many times, after I cured someone, the person themselves would spread the word that they had gotten better through a miracle from God or on their own, denying that I had helped. It was a way to use my knowledge without admitting they had sought out the witch. It was a Tuesday in March of '62 when I was called to see Mrs. Sharon's little girl. I was 19 years old and already known in 3 neighboring towns as a healer who solved difficult cases. The demand was so great that sometimes I would see 10, 12 people a day. Most of it in secret, all in the shadows, all denied later. Mrs. Sharon's house was in the poorest part of town, in a dirt alley where the wood frame houses were crammed together. She worked as a laundress for the wealthy families and was raising 5 children alone after her husband died from a snake bite. The youngest daughter, Amelia, was 4 years old and had been sick for a week. It started with a fever and diarrhea, common symptoms that any mother knew how to treat with homemade tea and a light diet. But the girl's condition worsened day by day. When I arrived at her house, I found a desperate situation. Amelia was dehydrated, with a very high fever, delirious, and vomiting everything she managed to swallow. Her skin was dry like old leather, her eyes sunken in her skull, her breathing weak and rapid. Mrs. Sharon was terrified. "Abigail, you have to save my little girl. She's the most precious thing I have in the world. If anything happens to her, I'll die with her." I examined the child carefully. From the symptoms, it seemed to be a severe intestinal infection, the kind that killed many children back then. She needed to be hydrated urgently, and the infection fought with strong medicine. I prepared a homemade saline solution with boiled water, sugar, and salt, and managed to get the girl to take it in small sips with a spoon. I made a chamomile and anise tea to calm her stomach and ran to the drugstore to get an antibiotic I knew could help. I stayed at Mrs. Sharon's house for 3 days and 3 nights straight, caring for Amelia as if she were my own daughter. I gave her medicine every hour, changed her sweaty clothes, and applied cool, damp cloths to bring down the fever. I prayed all the prayers Grandma had taught me. The girl showed signs of improvement. The fever went down a bit. She managed to drink more fluids. She even managed a small smile when I sang her a lullaby. Mrs. Sharon became hopeful. She said she was sure I was going to save her daughter. But in the early hours of the 3rd day, the situation became complicated. Amelia had convulsions. Her breathing became very difficult, and she entered a state that I no longer knew how to reverse. I did everything in my power. I changed the medication, increased the hydration, used every prayer and folk remedy I knew. It was no use. The girl died in my arms as the sun was rising, on a Thursday I will never forget. She simply stopped breathing, went limp in my arms like a rag doll. Mrs. Sharon let out a scream that echoed down the entire street and fainted on the floor. I just sat there, holding that lifeless little body, feeling like I had failed in the worst possible way. The neighbors came running because of Mrs. Sharon's scream, and that's when my downfall began. One of the first women to arrive was a close friend of Mrs. Karen's, a woman named Patricia who had always resented me. "I warned you this girl was not blessed by God," she started shouting for everyone to hear. "A healthy child doesn't just die like that. This was witchcraft, it was a hex." And she pointed her finger at me as if I were the devil himself. Mrs. Sharon, when she came to, was distraught with grief. She needed someone to blame for her daughter's death. And I was right there in front of her, an easy target for all her anger and despair. "You killed my daughter," she screamed. "You came here to harm her. My little girl was getting better. What did you do?" I tried to explain that I had done everything right, that the illness was too severe, that not even a doctor from Springfield could have saved a child in that state. But a mother's grief doesn't listen to reason. She wanted a culprit to hate, and I was the perfect one for the role. When grief is too great, people don't need reason, my dear. They need someone to blame. And a different girl like me, one they both feared and needed, was the easiest target for all their outrage. What a cruel irony, that her kindness and her desperate attempt to save a life would become the very evidence used against her. The fire of superstition and hatred has been lit, and it's about to erupt. Can Abigail escape this senseless fury? The news spread through the town with incredible speed. Before noon, everyone knew that the fiery-haired witch had killed an innocent child with sorcery. The version circulating on the streets was that I had used poison instead of medicine. Mrs. Karen appeared at my door before I even got back from the wake. She was with 5 other women, all dressed in black, all with the look of someone spoiling for a fight. "Abigail," she said in a harsh voice, "the time has come for you to answer for what you've been doing in this town." "I haven't done anything wrong, Mrs. Karen," I replied. "I tried to save the girl, but God wanted to take her to be with him." But she didn't want to hear explanations. "A 4-year-old girl doesn't just die for no reason," she said. "You've been meddling with things you shouldn't have. You made a pact with evil forces to be able to cure so many people, and now the devil has come to collect his price." The other women confirmed everything she said, creating an ever more fantastical version of the story. They said I performed rituals at midnight, that I spoke with evil spirits, that I used animal blood in my potions. The pressure mounted day by day, like a pot on the fire that heats up until it explodes. People stopped coming to me for treatment, even those who used to come in secret. When I walked down the street, they would make the sign of the cross and move away, as if I had leprosy. Mothers would pull their children inside when they saw me coming. The nights became hell. They started throwing stones at my roof, making a noise that terrified me, waking me with a start. In the morning, I would find burnt wooden crosses at my gate, as if it were a cemetery for evil people. Once, I found a cloth doll hanging from a tree in the yard, pierced with pins, with strands of red wool to represent my hair. But the worst happened on a Thursday, in the middle of the night. I woke up to a rotten smell coming from the gate. When I went to see, I almost threw up from the shock. There was a dead toad right at the entrance to my house, swollen and stinking, its mouth sewn shut with black thread. Its belly was cut open, and coarse salt was spread all over it. Look at these strange people, I thought. They call me a witch, but they're the ones practicing witchcraft. I remembered Grandma saying that if you found a dead animal with its mouth sewn shut, it was a powerful hex, a work done to silence someone forever or bring great misfortune. Despite my disgust, I took a knife and opened the toad's mouth. Grandma always said it was important to see what was inside to know what kind of evil they were doing. Inside, I found a small, wet, disgusting piece of paper. Unfolding it, I saw my name, Abigail, written in black ink by someone with good handwriting. That's when I understood it was no longer a game of ignorant people. Someone was doing serious work against me, using the same arts they accused me of practicing. The irony was bitter. They called me a witch, but they were the ones practicing real sorcery. It's ironic, isn't it, my dear? They called me a witch, but it was they who secretly practiced the darkest kinds of magic. That just shows you, fear can turn the most pious people into the very thing they despise. I said a powerful prayer to break the curse. The situation became unbearable when someone poisoned my medicinal herb garden. I woke up one morning to find all the beds that Grandma had planted with love destroyed. The plants withered and black, as if they had been burned from the inside out. That's when I understood that it was no longer a matter of persecution, it was a matter of survival. They wanted to drive me out of town, or kill me. And from the way things were going, the second option was becoming more likely. The tension in town reached its limit on a Friday at the end of May. 62. It had been 2 months since Mrs. Sharon's daughter had died, and since then, my life had become a living hell. I couldn't leave the house without being insulted. I had no way to earn money because no one sought me out. I was living only on what I had saved and the small garden that remained after the poisoning. That afternoon, I was at home mending an old skirt when I heard a different noise on the street. It was a low murmur at first, like wind through the leaves, but it grew until it became loud conversation, shouts, a commotion. I looked out the window and saw people gathering in the square, more people than I had ever seen together in that town. The center of the gathering was Mrs. Karen, who was gesturing wildly as she spoke to a group of women. Mrs. Sharon was beside her, still dressed in mourning, her face swollen from crying. And there were men too, Mr. Johnson from the store, some farmers, even Mr. Harrison, who had once protected me. By nightfall, the group had grown to over 50 people. Someone brought kerosene torches. Other people appeared with hoes, pitchforks, and pieces of wood. The murmur turned into a roar. I began to understand that this wasn't just another meeting to talk badly about me. "Enough talk," shouted a voice I recognized as Andrew's, James's older brother. "This witch has done enough harm to this town. It's time to put an end to this situation." Other men agreed, and the women began to shout too. "Out, witch! Child murderer! Burn her!" The voices mingled in a cacophony that chilled the blood in my veins. I locked all the doors and windows, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark, wondering what to do. There was nowhere to run. The whole town was against me, and the neighboring towns had already heard the stories. If I tried to escape on foot down the road, they would easily catch me. Around 8 o'clock at night, the crowd began to move in my direction. I could hear the sound of their footsteps on the dry earth, the angry murmur approaching like a storm. Some people carried lanterns and torches, creating dancing shadows that looked like demons on the walls of the houses. When they arrived in front of my house, the noise was deafening. Dozens of voices shouting at the same time, demanding that I come out, threatening to break down the door if I didn't appear. "Come out of there, witch! Come face what you've done! Your time has come!" Mrs. Karen climbed onto a crate to get taller and signaled for the crowd to be quiet. When she managed a relative silence, she screamed towards my house. "Abigail, you have 1 minute to come out of there and ask forgiveness for your sins. If you don't come out peacefully, we will come in and get you." I didn't answer. I was leaning against the living room wall, trembling with fear, but also furious at the injustice of it all. I had done nothing to deserve this. I had spent my whole life helping people, curing the sick, alleviating suffering, and now they wanted to kill me because a child had died of an illness. The minute passed, and they began to push the gate. The old wood gave way easily, and the mob flooded my yard like a flash flood. They trampled the remaining beds of Grandma's garden, knocked down the fruit trees, broke the clay pots where I stored my dried herbs. "Break everything," someone shouted. "Destroy this cursed house." And they obeyed with an enthusiasm that frightened me. They broke the windows with stones, tore out the flowers from the garden. They turned everything they found in the yard upside down. Some men started to force the door of the house. It was a heavy, solid wood door that Grandpa had made, but it wouldn't hold for long with all those people pushing. The hinges groaned, the wood cracked, and I knew that in a few minutes they would manage to get in. It was then that I heard the voice of Father Michael above all the chaos. "Brothers," he shouted, "remember that we are Christians. We cannot take justice into our own hands." For a moment, I thought he had come to defend me, but I soon saw that wasn't quite it. "This woman must be judged according to the laws of God," he continued. "But it must be a fair trial, not a barbarity." He wanted to do everything by the book, with a religious process, a forced confession, public repentance before the punishment. But the crowd was too riled up to accept a delay. "Enough talk, Father," shouted Mrs. Karen. "This witch has already killed an innocent child. She has to pay today." and the whole crowd roared in agreement. The door finally gave way with a crash that sounded like lightning striking nearby. They swarmed in like a hive of angry wasps, turning everything upside down, searching for me in the rooms, under the bed, behind the furniture. I had hidden in the attic crawl space, a small hole between the rafters that Grandpa had made to store tools. From up there, I could hear them destroying everything that Grandma and Grandpa had built with so much care. They were breaking dishes, tearing clothes, throwing my books on the floor. "Where is she?" bellowed Mrs. Sharon. "I want to look into the eyes of my daughter's murderer. I want to see her pay for what she did." Someone had the idea to look for where I was. I heard voices approaching my hiding place. When they found where I was, it was a celebration. "We found the witch. Get her out of there. Now she's going to get it." They dragged me down the ladder like a sack of potatoes. I tried to protect myself, but it was useless. They pushed me, shook me, screamed at me, spit in my face. The line between humanity and monstrosity is terrifyingly thin, easily erased by fear and mob mentality. In this moment, Abigail faces not just death, but the ugliest face of human nature. Will a miracle intervene? Or is this the end for the girl with the fiery hair? The red hair that had always been my trademark became a target. They pulled it hard, tried to cut it with a dull knife. When they took me out to the yard, I saw that they had prepared a bonfire with the wood from my broken furniture. The flames were already high, licking the night air, creating demonic shadows on the faces of those people I had known since childhood. "Let's burn the witch," someone shouted. "That's what you do with someone who makes a pact with the devil." And they began to push me towards the fire. It was then that Mr. Harrison appeared, mounted on his black horse, accompanied by 2 armed employees. He said nothing at first, just looked at the scene with a disgusted expression. "Enough," he finally shouted, and his voice had enough authority to make everyone stop. "What is this shameful display? Have you all turned into animals or what?" He dismounted slowly, walking towards the group that held me. "Sir," said Mrs. Karen, "you don't understand. This woman is dangerous. She killed an innocent child with witchcraft." But he raised his hand, signaling her to be quiet. "Mrs. Karen, you are old and senile. This girl saved my daughter when the doctor from Springfield had given up on her. If she were a real witch, she wouldn't have used her power to save a life." He looked at me, bruised and covered in dirt. "Let her go, now." The crowd hesitated. Mr. Harrison was the most powerful man in the region, owner of land, cattle, and a lot of money. No one had the courage to disobey a direct order from him, but they were also addicted to the violence. They wanted blood to appease their anger. "You have 5 minutes to disperse, mister?" Harrison said. "Anyone still here after that will have a problem with me, and you know a problem with me doesn't end well." His employees showed their weapons to make it clear he wasn't bluffing. The crowd began to disperse slowly, grumbling with dissatisfaction, but afraid to confront Mr. Harrison. In half an hour, it was just me, him, and his 2 employees in the middle of the destruction that had been my home. "Girl," he said, "you can't stay here anymore. I was able to save you today, but tomorrow they'll be back, and I might not be around." He took money from his pocket and gave it to me. "Take this, gather what's left of your things, and disappear from this town. Go far away, change your name if you have to, but never come back." I knew he was right. If I stayed, they would finish what they had started. I thanked Mr. Harrison, took the little that was left of my things, and left that town in the wagon of a traveling salesman who was passing through. To be saved, only to lose everything. It is both a release and a pain. On that fateful wagon, Abigail leaves her past and her very name behind. An old chapter has closed in ashes, but a completely blank page is opening. Let's see what new story she will write. The salesman Isaac's wagon rocked like a boat in a rough sea, and every jolt on the dirt road reminded me that I was leaving behind everything I had ever known. It was dawn when we left the town, and I looked back only once, seeing the lights of the houses fading in the distance like dying stars. On that wagon, Abigail died, my dear. I had to let her die with the house, the garden, and all the pain. To survive, I had to become someone else, a blank page with no past. with no curse attached. Isaac was a man of few words, but a kind heart. He had seen the commotion in the square and understood that I needed to disappear from there if I wanted to stay alive. "Girl," he said when we stopped to rest the mules, "where are you headed?" When I answered that I didn't know, he shook his head. "Then come with me to Rosewood. No one knows you there, and there are good people who can help you." Rosewood was a 3-day journey away, in a region of large farms and small towns. The salesman knew everyone around there. He sold trinkets from house to house, carrying news from one place to another. During the journey, he told me about a widowed lady named Mrs. Margaret who needed someone to help around the house. "She lost her husband last year," he explained, "and has a young daughter who needs company. They are decent, religious people, but not fanatics. She might take you in without asking too many questions about your past." When we arrived in Rosewood, I felt like I had entered another world. The town was bigger, busier, with better stores and people who seemed less suspicious. Mrs. Margaret lived in a large house on the main street, an inheritance from her husband who had been a prosperous merchant. She was a woman in her early 40s, with black hair showing a few gray strands, and well-cared-for hands of someone who had never done hard labor. She received the salesman's recommendation well, but she looked at me with the natural suspicion of someone about to let a stranger into her home. "What's your name, girl?" she asked. It was the first time I had to invent a new identity. "Mary," I replied without hesitation. "Mary Grace." I chose a common name that wouldn't attract attention, that would go unnoticed anywhere. "And your family? Do you have papers?" The question I dreaded came quickly. I had prepared the story I had concocted on the journey and took a deep breath before answering. "I'm an orphan, Mrs. Margaret. I lived with my grandparents in the country, but they passed away, and I had to leave in a hurry because of a terrible accident." I paused for a moment, as if it were painful to remember, and continued. "The last night I spent in their house, I woke up to the smell of smoke. The wood-burning stove had caught fire during the night. I think an ember jumped out and landed on the wooden floor. By the time I realized, half the house was already in flames." "Mrs. Margaret made a sympathetic sound, and I continued the lie. "I managed to run out with only the clothes on my back. I tried to save some things, but the fire spread too quickly. It burned everything: my birth certificate, family papers, even the photographs my grandmother kept in a tin box. The house was all old wood and adobe. It turned to ash in a few hours." "Jesus, what a tragedy," she murmured, crossing herself. "And there were no neighbors to help?" "There were, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. There was only enough time to stop the fire from spreading to other houses. Nothing salvageable was left of my house. Even the well was filled with ash and debris." I knew that accidents with wood-burning stoves were common in the countryside, so the story sounded plausible. She hired me to take care of the house and be a companion to her 16-year-old daughter, Helena, pretty, well-mannered girl who studied at the convent school and dreamed of being a teacher. From the very first day, Helen treated me like a friend, not a servant. Life at Mrs. Margaret's house was calm, organized, very different from the chaos I had left behind. We would wake up early, have coffee with fresh bread and butter, and each go about our activities. I took care of the cleaning, the food, the laundry. Helen studied, practiced the piano, and embroidered. What impressed me most was the library of Mrs. Margaret's late husband. He had collected books his entire life: novels, poetry, history books, even some on medicine and science. At night, when my work was done, Helen would lend me books, and we would talk about the stories. "Mary, you read very well," Helen observed one night. "Where did you learn?" I explained that I was self-taught, that I had always loved to read anything I could get my hands on. She found this interesting and started lending me more complex books, teaching me things she was learning at school. During the day, when I went out to do the shopping in town, I would listen to people's conversations, trying to understand how this place worked. Rosewood was much more liberal than my hometown. Women worked outside the home. Some even had their own professions. There were Protestants mixed with Catholics, people of different backgrounds living in peace. Still, I was careful. Whenever someone asked questions about my past, I changed the subject. When I saw medicinal plants in people's yards, I resisted the temptation to give advice on how to use them. When I heard someone complaining of an illness, I bit my tongue so as not to offer help. It was hard to hide my nature. Once, Helen cut her finger badly in the kitchen, and I automatically grabbed an aloe vera leaf to stop the bleeding and help it heal. She found it strange that I knew that, but I explained that it was common knowledge in the countryside. After living there for 6 months, a suitor appeared for me. Benjamin was a 40-year-old widower, owner of a small farm on the outskirts of town, a hard-working, simple man who needed a wife to take care of the house and help on the farm. Margaret made a point of arranging the marriage. "Mary, you can't stay single forever. Benjamin is a good, hard-working, religious man. He will take good care of you." And Helen agreed. "You deserve to be happy, to have your own family." I accepted the marriage because I understood it was my chance to have a normal life. Benjamin didn't know me, didn't know about my past, had no prejudice against my different appearance. To him, I was just an orphaned, hard-working girl who had agreed to marry an older widower. The wedding was simple, at the town church with Mrs. Margaret and Helen as witnesses. Benjamin gave me a simple gold ring and a blue calico dress he had a seamstress make. From Abigail to Mary, from a hunted witch to an ordinary wife. This marriage may not have been born of passion, but it was the peaceful harbor she had longed for. But can a secret from such a violent past truly stay buried forever? It wasn't a marriage for love, but there was affection and mutual respect. His property was an hour's horse ride from town. A small but comfortable house with a large yard, a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, and a few acres of land to plant corn and beans. Life was simple. Waking up early, taking care of the animals, working in the fields, cooking, keeping the house clean. Benjamin was a man of few words, but affectionate in his own way. He never asked prying questions about my past, never suspected my story. He treated me well, didn't hit me, didn't drink too much, and shared the household decisions with me. To him, I was just Mary, the wife God had sent to take care of him in his old age. There were nights, after the children were asleep, when I would watch him by the dim light of the kerosene lamp, his face weathered by the sun, his hands resting on his lap, calloused but gentle. There was no fiery passion like I had dreamed of with James, but there was something more solid, more real. It was the quiet peace of acceptance. In his world, my red hair was not a curse. My knowledge was not a threat. I was simply his wife, the mother of his children. In that quiet, ordinary life, the ice around my heart began, ever so slowly, to melt. It wasn't a grand healing, but a slow, gentle thawing. We had 3 children, healthy, lively kids, but they gave me the shock of my life when they were born. All of them, without exception, came into the world with my fiery hair. John was the first, and when the midwife lifted him up to show me, my heart almost stopped. A head of intense red hair that shone like a burning ember. God help me, I thought. Is this curse going to be passed on to my children too? Peter was born 2 years later, as red-haired as his brother. And Anna, my little girl, came with hair that looked like a candle flame, even redder than mine. It was beautiful to see, but it scared me to death. Benjamin thought it was beautiful. "They are 3 little angels with hair of fire," he would say proudly. For him, who had never suffered discrimination because of his appearance, it was just a beautiful trait I had passed on to our children. He didn't understand the danger it could represent. I was terrified thinking that someone would find it strange to have a whole family of redheads in a region where it was rare. Whenever I went out with the children, I was tense, waiting for some malicious comment, some suspicion. But to my surprise, people thought it was lovely. "What a beautiful family," they would say. "They look like porcelain dolls." Over time, I understood that far from my hometown, red hair wasn't seen as a diabolical mark. It was just a different, even admired, characteristic. But I have a feeling it's because I didn't reveal who I really was. If they had associated my appearance with my healing gifts, they certainly would have seen me with different eyes. My children grew up free from the prejudice I suffered. Even while carrying the same physical mark, that almost cost me my life. Motherhood transformed me. Taking care of my children, watching them grow up healthy and happy, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't had in years. Finally, I had managed to be normal, to have the life I had always dreamed of having with James. Benjamin died of a massive heart attack while plowing the field. I was widowed at 35, with 3 children to raise alone. It was hard, but I managed to keep the farm and provide an education for the children. When they were grown, married, and with children of their own, I decided to tell the truth. I couldn't bear to carry that secret alone anymore. My husband Benjamin never knew my true story, and it was at a family gathering on Christmas of '95 that I decided to tell everything. "Children," I began, my voice trembling, "you deserve to know who your mother really is." And I told them everything. My real name, Abigail. The persecution I suffered, the attempted lynching, the escape. How I became Mary Grace. They were shocked at first. John was the first to speak. "Mom, you went through all that and never said a word?" Peter, always more studious, wanted to know all the details about the medicine I practiced. And Anna, my nurse, understood immediately why I always knew so much about plants and cures. "Now I understand where my way with patients comes from," she said, hugging me tightly. "It's your inheritance, and from great-grandma Beatrice's knowledge." That hug from my Anna, it was like a great weight being lifted from my chest after so many years. For the first time, I wasn't the witch, not the freak, not even Mary Grace. I was simply their mother, and I was completely accepted. That, my dear, was the most precious healing of all. After decades of silence, the truth is finally spoken, not to be judged, but to be loved. This is perhaps the most complete healing Abigail could have ever hoped for. But the story isn't quite over, because the past is still there, and a journey back to where it all began is about to unfold. From that day on, it was an immense relief to be myself with my own children. Sometime after I told my children my story, John had an idea that left me torn between curiosity and fear. "Mom, we could go see how the town where you were born is doing, see the places from your childhood." Peter and Anna quickly agreed, saying they wanted to know the family's roots. It took me weeks to agree. More than 30 years had passed since I fled that town in a salesman's wagon. Would there still be anyone alive who recognized me? Did my grandparents' house still exist? What if someone identified me as the witch who was almost burned alive? But curiosity won out over fear. The 4 of us got into John's car, but his wife, Sarah, also wanted to come along for the trip, which once took 3 days by wagon and now took almost a full day by road. The world had changed so much that sometimes I didn't recognize the way. When we arrived in the small town, my heart raced. It was late afternoon, getting dark. The main square still existed, but it was smaller than I remembered. The church had been renovated, painted white and blue. Where there used to be only dirt roads, there was now asphalt. New houses had been built, but many of the old ones were abandoned. "Mom, where was grandparents' house?" Anna asked, seeing my tense expression. I directed them down the main street until we reached what was once our property. What I saw broke my heart. The house was in complete ruins. The roof had collapsed, the walls were crumbling, and weeds had taken over everything. Grandpa's forge was just a pile of rusty iron covered in grass. The beds where Grandma cultivated her medicinal herbs were now a dense thicket, full of rubble and trash. "My God," I murmured, getting out of the car with trembling legs. How could it have gotten to this state? Tears began to stream down my face without me realizing it. John offered me his arm for support as we walked through what used to be our yard. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked with concern. I couldn't answer. I was seeing ghosts in every corner. Grandma watering the plants, Grandpa hammering iron, me, a little girl, running among the fruit trees, which were now just dry stumps. Peter, always curious, started talking to a resident who appeared to see who the visitors were. By now it was night, and before we got out of the car, I had put a scarf on my head and told the kids to do the same. John wore a cap. Peter and Anna also covered up. "Better not to draw attention," I said. "Do you know the history of this house?" Peter asked a man of about 30, keeping a safe distance. "Oh, this house has a dark history," the man replied, looking at the ruins. "My father used to say that a witch lived here in the 50s and 60s, a woman with red hair who practiced witchcraft. They say she killed a child and had to flee town in the middle of the night to avoid being lynched. She was known as Red Abbey or Fiery Abbey. After that, no one else wanted to live here. They say the house is haunted." When the man mentioned the red hair, I saw my children tense up. My heart pounded. Peter, always quick-witted, responded swiftly. "We've come from far away, from the southern part of the state. We're just passing through, curious about the old stories of the region." My children looked at me with shocked expressions. There I was, standing in front of the ruins of my childhood, listening to my own story told as an urban legend by a man who hadn't even been born when it happened. "And this witch? What happened to her?" Anna asked, hiding the emotion in her voice. "Nobody knows. She vanished into the world. Some say she died a divine punishment, others that she went to live somewhere else. But what's certain is that after she left, the town was at peace. There were no more strange cases of children dying." I wanted to laugh at the bitter irony of the situation. At that moment, I understood how legends of witches, hauntings, and supernatural stories that terrorize the countryside are born. It's not something from another world, my dear. It's the people themselves who create these monsters to explain what they don't understand, to make sense of the tragedies that happen. A child dies of an illness. It can't be a lack of doctors or medicine. It has to be witchcraft. A woman is different from the others. It can't just be genetics. It has to be a pact with the devil. A house is abandoned after a tragedy. It can't just be sadness. It has to be a haunting. People need a villain to blame, a fantastical explanation for what real life can't answer. And when there's no real demon, they invent one, turning a person of flesh and blood into a horror legend. They pass down stories from father to son that become more and more distorted. How many witches like me existed across America? How many men and women were turned into the boogeymen of small towns just for being different, too intelligent, too independent? How many saw their true stories rewritten as horror tales? There, standing in front of the ruins of my childhood, I realized that I had become part of the local folklore. How bitter it must be to see your life story twisted into a horror tale for others to tell. But it is also in this moment that Abigail truly makes peace with her past. She understands that her real legacy is not the curse haunting that old town, but the love and the family she built from the ashes. In 100 years, if this town still exists, they will tell the children about the fiery-haired witch who disappeared on a stormy night. And no one will remember that behind that legend was an orphan girl who only wanted to help those who were suffering. So now you see, my dear, that is my story. The one I carry not as a burden, but as a testament. A testament that fear builds monsters, but love builds legacies. I look at my hands now, wrinkled and spotted with age, and I don't see the hands of a witch. I see the hands that held my dying grandmother, that mixed herbs to soothe a fever, that were rejected by a love I thought was my world, and that held my own red-haired children for the first time. They tried to burn me, to silence me, to turn me into a ghost story. But they failed. I survived. And in a world that so desperately needs villains, the greatest act of rebellion, the most powerful magic of all, is simply to endure and to build a life out of the ashes. My journey back to that old home after so many years was not just a trip, but a silent conversation with the past. When I returned, at 82 years old, I made peace with my memories, laying down a small cross and whispering, "Thank you for everything." I lived a misunderstood life, carrying 2 names and a story of survival. But from those challenges, I built a legacy greater than any legend, a tight-knit family where my children and grandchildren are proud of their resilient grandmother. My legacy isn't the haunted ruin back in that forgotten town. It's the laughter of my grandchildren. That, my dear, is a truth no fire can burn, no legend can erase. That's how we become legends, my love. Not because we are special, but because we were misunderstood in a time and place where being different was not accepted. I hope my story reminds you that the value of a life isn't measured by its perfection, but by how we confront, overcome, and turn our scars into pride. Can you feel the power of this story? If you also believe in human resilience, I would love to hear a story of resilience that you know. Please, share it. It is by listening to and spreading more inspiring life stories like this that we find the motivation to continue on our journeys.